Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. We're going to be looking at another Chinese pen. Don't be alarmed, don't be surprised. I seem to be on a roll here. And this is a pen that some of my viewers recommended I look at. It's a takeoff on the Pilot 78G, which apparently production moved into China at some point in time, and so all that techniques of making the pen were now available to the Chinese to make their own. It comes in clear with gold and silver. It also comes in solid colors, similar to the 78G. They come with two nibs. One's installed in the pen and one is a secondary nib, fine and extra fine, like 0.35 and 0.5 millimeters is, I think, their definition. Nice packaging. I always wanted a green 78G, so now I have one. Not exactly a real one, but one that will fill the bill. We compare it to an actual 78G. There's not a lot of difference except maybe the branding. And of course, the Pilot pens always came with a little sticker on them, at least the ones that I got. Notice that the labeling is the same side as the clip here, which says Lucky on it. Owing Sung does that with a lot of their pens. The 78G says Pilot on it. The end is also very similar, including that little dimple where probably the feeder to the injection mold was there. And rather than have it be flush, it's a little bit indented, which I think might also explain why these don't have cracks in them and there's no plug. So maybe as I compare these to the Jinhao 992s, which to me is a fair comparison, there's a plug there, which apparently when they molded it, they left an opening there, which they put a plug in. So these are, again, quite similar. The 78G is a little cleaner. They both feel the same. They both weigh the same. So there's not a lot of significant difference there. I don't believe the 78G ever came in a full transparent demonstrator model, as this one does, including a clear feed. This is the rhodium trim one. It has that converter in it, which, interesting, has a white part of the piston filler. Still, you have your silver metal band there to keep it together, and you have your little agitator there. So one of the things that I noticed right away is there's no O-rings anywhere on this pen, which the Jinhao 992 has two O-rings on it, which really allow it to be more of an eyedropper, even though it doesn't have the same stability at the bottom of the barrel. Here you can see clearly how that is molded. There are no cracks, at least so far in this one. The facets are very nice. That's something that I think is an interesting feature. Obviously, I think TWSBI was the one that I first became aware of that feature being used in a clear fountain pen. The cap is also 100% clear. And you can see how that is assembled at the top of the cap. And again, more facets. It makes it for an interesting look and an interesting design. I'm always interested in how pens are put together and made, and when looking at this pen, I noticed what appear to be threads here at the top, so I'm just wondering if this cap comes off, and it does. It unscrews. Let me drop it. And the clip just is keyed onto place onto that little extension off the top of the cap. It's very clean design, very nice design. And if you want to use it As a clipless pen, you can just leave the cap off, put the plug back on, and use it as a pocket pen or as a clipless pen if you like that design. It is an attractive pen, I will admit that. Jing that was in the 698 piston filler, obviously made for retail display. You open it up and it has instruction manual, which is basically entirely in Chinese. Shows the parts. And it also gives some fundamental filling instructions and also cleaning instructions, which is quite nice. No cap liner in there, so the sealing of the nib is going to be totally on the contact when the cap is put on. And we'll see how well that works as I ink these up, and I'm going to definitely use them. At least this one I'll use as an eyedropper, the other one I'll use as a cartridge converter, just to see the difference between them. And since I didn't use any of the Jinhaos as cartridge converters, you know, this one's the same converter, but this has a black turning knob, so that's interesting that they used white, and I'm just surprised they didn't go to transparent. This has a solid color feed on it, so that's interesting. So the other thing I find interesting is that the spare nib is clear. So that gives her an interesting combo when you use that as the second nib. I'm not exactly certain. I have mixed feelings on the aesthetics of this. It's an interesting combo. When capped, you don't notice that that is a feature of the pen. And I personally like the section to be the same material as the barrel, or at least, you know, mimic some part of the aesthetics of the pen. You know, here it's clear and it doesn't fit in with anything else on the pen. So that's an interesting, you know, feature set. Either love it or hate it. I'm more on the dislike side. This end of the Wing Sung 659. They give you two nibs with the pen in a lot of its configurations. So what I find interesting is the green one has a gold-plated metal accessories, you know, the clip and the nib. And the transparency has the silver rhodium-plated ones. The fine nib in both pens has a little metal ring at the top of the section, which is missing from the extra fine. I don't know whether that's by design or what. It doesn't make a lot of sense as to why one would have a metal ring and the other ones wouldn't. Both of them screw in okay. Obviously, we're going to have to make certain that they don't leak because we're going to eyedropper the transparent one. But I thought just for comparison's sake, we would take a look at the Jinhao nib assembly. So there's a few obvious differences. One, the nib is a different design. There's a opaque black feed. There's that O-ring, and there's also an O-ring at the bottom of the nib assembly. And this has a nib assembly in it where this just has your feed and nib that's just a pressure fit, pull in and pull out. The section is much longer, so the converter, when it goes in, fits in quite nicely, but it also fits in quite nicely with the Jinhao 992. So that's just an interesting comparison. And then as a final comparison, we'll show a real Pilot 78. I only have these in black, but you'll notice that the design is quite similar. It has that extended section here. No band on any of the sections that I found on the 78G. Both of the nibs say super quality, which is part of what they have there. You know, it's part of the branding or trademarking. It's kind of interesting that they find that they need to say that. Nibs, the extra fine is on the right, the fine is on the left, and it is a subtle difference between the two. I haven't inked up the extra fine yet, so we're going to be doing that and comparing that with the fine and also the fine that's in the Metropolitan Turn over, there's that beautiful clear feed that I like, and there is a difference in tipping material. Supposedly one's 0.38 millimeters, the other is 0.05. But to me, that's a subtle, minor differences. It's not like it's significant between a fine and a medium, or a medium and a broad that we tend to see in other pens. Ink with some color in it, so I haven't used this ink for a while. And it's a pilot ink, so it'd be interesting to see how it works in the pilot-like Wing Sung. I use this plastic insert because this cap tends to weld itself to the bottle, and I've broken at least one or two caps. So this allows you to take it off, and the ink, I think it's a property of the ink and also the property of the materials in the cap. I'll put a new liner in when I put the cap on. Going to use your classic syringe. We'll actually measure how much ink we put in. I have 4 milliliters of ink in this syringe. So we're going to fill up the barrel. Interesting color. There's no plug at the bottom, no cracks that I can see. It's a different design of this injection molded piece. I'm going to fill it up to about just a hair more, because you got that extension coming off the section. So we have a 1.8 milliliters left, or about 1.75, so it took over 2 milliliters of ink. So that's a nice amount of ink to put in there. It'll last for quite a while, especially with an extra fine nib that we have. Before I filled up the barrel, is we need to put silicone grease on these threads just to ensure that no ink leaks out once you eyedropper it. You know, you can get silicone grease from any of the pen suppliers, Goulet pens, etc. I just bought this big tub from Amazon for about the same price as you'd get a little one, but there's probably enough here to last me for multiple lifetimes. So I just coat all the threads. I coat them well. I don't mind if there's a little excess. We'll wipe it off once we assemble the pen. Now we're going to see if we can watch the ink go through. As you can see, I could have put more ink in there, but I've already emptied the syringe, so we probably could have put, if this is 2.2 milliliters, we probably could have put about 2.5 or 2.6 in there, but I like a little bit of air. So one of the things that people talked about with eyedroppers is you need to let the ink saturate the feed, and as you can see, it's doing a good job there, working its way through the channels of the feed. Maybe we'll go to a higher speed to move this along. Been about 30 seconds so far. I like the color. It certainly works well with this clear demonstrator. As you can see, there's no ink coming past the threads, which is nice. Definitely illustrates how those fins on either side of the channel certainly do hold a decent amount of ink. This is always a slow process. I generally just put the cap on, put it upside down, and leave it. So while that ink is saturating the feed, I thought I'd compare these two caps. The Jinhao is, the Wing Sung is on the top, the Jinhao is on the bottom. The Wing Sung has that lucky on the clip. One of the things that's apparent is there's no liner in the Wing Sung where it is in the Jinhao, and they both feel substantial, and also there's no metal band at the bottom. This is just metal colored paint, where this has a pretty solid metal cap at the bottom. So considering that you would think that the Wing Sung was the less expensive of these two pens, but it is not. It's at least double, if not more, the cost of the Jinhao. Fully saturated, but we do have ink running to the nib, so I'm going to play around with this a little bit, and then we'll do a writing sample with the two different nib sizes on these Wing Sung 7-8G Mimics. The other comparison pen is the Wingsung 698, the piston filler, to the 659. I mean, almost twice the weight. It feels substantially heavier. Bigger clip. We have that metal finial at the top. Big band here. Obviously with eyedropper fill, probably about the same type of ink, if not a little bit more, in the eyedrop model. Same nib. I've replaced the nib on this one with a Plumix nib, but you can see how the ink fills up the section. Flip it over, you can see how it fills up the feed and the section. Now this one was filled with a piston, so ink was drawn up through this channel, which is how it pulls up ink into the pen. And this one was eyedroppered, so all the ink came down from the top, no ink was pulled up from the bottom. So I think that explains a little bit of the differences, but maybe over time this will all fill in with ink. And yes, to answer those questions, any pilot nib from Plumix to 78G to, how many pens does Pilot make in this range that all use the same nib and feed? There's quite a bit. So you have a lot to choose from. I have 6 pens in it, because I think it's important to take a look at these nibs, how they work. They all have their own unique characteristics, and as we buy pens to write with, it'd be one of the main criteria in determining which pen we would like to get. So here's the 2 Wingsung 659s, one in clear, one in green, Pilot 78G in black with a fine nib, Jinhao 992 eyedroppered, so this one's eyedroppered, this one's eyedroppered. This also is what they call a fine nib. And then we have the 2 Wingsung 698 piston fillers, both with a fine nib, both with 2 different types of ink in them. So let's start with the 659 clear. This definitely looks nice with the ink and the clear section and feed. It fits fine in the hand. You know, this is a classic shape. It's, I would say, about as small as I like a section to get. If it's a little bit smaller, it gets to be a little bit uncomfortable. You can hold it anywhere. You really don't know. You know the threads are there, but they don't interfere with using the ink. You know, like the way it sloshes around. That's just cool. And it works fine, obviously, in the hand without posting. It can be posted very easily and doesn't really change the balance or the way the pen feels. This is certainly on the fine side. One of the things that I notice is it does require some pressure to write. Without pressure, it's a really fine line and it tends skip. You know, this skip up here could have just been because I just wasn't keeping it on the paper right. Those of us who use fountain pens realize that they are sensitive to angle. But with this medium pressure, it pretty much glides across this paper, Fabriano. I think it's a little bit of more of a coarser surface on it than the other papers. So overall, it's a good extra fine nib. Extra fine is not necessarily my first choice in nibs. So now we're going to go to the fine nib that's in the green one. I think you notice right away it is a much wetter line and darker line. This is KWZ green number 5. And the other one was the Iroshizuku Miramashi Shibaku. They're kind of purplish colored. So this nib I could live with. When I first inked up this pen and wrote with it, I was in a wow moment, because it was better than I expected. I think you can tell from the way this looks on the paper. I mean, this is very usable. Again, very light pen. You notice I didn't post it because it feels fine without posting. But, you know, if you don't want to lose the cap or roll off the desk, you can post it and you're not going to find much of a difference in it. This is slightly smoother than the extra fine, which is what you would expect. So when I looked at these two nibs, I didn't expect to find that much of a difference between how they wrote, but it certainly is a difference, at least from my perception. So now we're going to look at the Pilot 78G with a fine nib as defined by Pilot. And this is the same nib the same ink as the fine nib up here, the KWZ. I wanted to use the same ink so you could do a really interesting comparison. And this writes more like the extra fine. This is a fine by definition, but I would say it's much more like an extra fine, which is interesting because it's marked with an F. I don't know whether Pilot made an extra fine. They may have done that. They certainly do on Metropolitan and some of their other models which use the same nib and feed. So overall, I prefer the fine nib in the 659. That's my favorite of these three. And then it's really a toss-up between the extra fine in the 659 and the fine in the 78G. If I had to pick between them, I would go with the Wing Sung. Again, they did a great job. I mean, considering the pen is available now, you can see it still has a little bit of a skipping issue, but I just have to get used to pressure, and maybe that would make the 78G a better nib from that viewpoint. But yeah, it's really very close to call. So now to really mess things up, we're going to go to the Jinhao 992, and this is considered a fine nib. It does have an F designation on it, so we can say it's officially a fine nib, but this writes more like a medium. And this is extremely smooth and extremely wet. And this is another KWZ ink, Azure number 4, so similar ink, similar flow characteristics, so it really does show the difference of the pens. And as I said, this is, I mean, right now this is a phenomenal writer for me. I've 3 of them being in my daily rotation for writing. So now we're going to go to the 698, and just for comparison's sake, we'll take a look at how, after these have set for a while, the 698 I've had inked up for a good long period of time. So you can see that feed and section are pretty well saturated with ink on the 698, which is also piston filled, so it had a different filling mechanism. You can't compare the nibs because this is a Plumix nib. So in order to compare nibs, I need to go to another 659, which I've kept the original nib in. There's the black one. And obviously, being black, what ink would I use but black yellow? So this is also considered a fine nib. And how does it compare to this fine nib? I would say it's similar. I'd say it's pretty close. The fine nib in the 659, I think, is a little bit smoother. This has a little bit more tooth to it. I think this ink is not quite as lubricating as the KWZ is, so that may have a little bit of it. And also, I don't think I've done any tuning. I didn't tune the 659 either, so. But I thought you would just like to compare all of these nibs. So this was just another review of Chinese pens, which continued to surprise me as far as their quality, engineering, manufacturing, and also consistency, which was not one of their strong suits. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this another review of a lot of different pens, which some of you have seen before. May you have many great writing experiences, inks, pens, and paper. Explore, Enjoy. Bye.